We are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast. To be exact, I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 37 of season 2, I got to talk to you, the people, about a few quick things. First off, if you're new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different things about the latest draft pick by the Detroit Pistons in this episode. So make sure to comment below along with us and give us your thoughts, opinions, questions, and all that you might have to say about Ron Holland. So make sure to just comment below real quick. And then if you want to be the first to know when we are uploading on YouTube and all of our platforms, make sure to hit the bell button on our YouTube profile. That will help you be the first to know about all of our content we are posting. And then obviously just last week we had our NBA draft live stream where we did from right before the draft, and then we talked about every draft pick until I believe the 16th pick, something like that. So if you guys tuned in, liked it, and commented, thank you guys so much. We appreciate all the support we had. It was a very successful live stream on both YouTube and Instagram. If you would like to rewatch that, go to our YouTube profile and scroll down a bit to our live videos, and there's only one option there. Go ahead and click on that, and you can see our live reaction to the Detroit Pistons picking Ron Holland with the 5th pick in this year's NBA draft. And if you haven't checked out our merch yet, make sure to click the link in the description below or in our YouTube bio. That link will shoot you to Grind Clothing Co.'s website. They are our official merch sponsor, and they've made plenty of different designs for you to choose from. So make sure to rep your favorite Detroit Pistons podcast, Revved Up 906. Anything from hats to sweatshirts to t-shirts to polos. Now that it's golf season, make sure to get yourself a Revved Up golf polo. And without further ado, let's get into episode number 37 of season 2. And just last week, Trajan Langdon, with the 5th pick in this year's NBA draft, picked up Ron Holland. And just 2 weeks ago, we talked about some of the guys that the Detroit Pistons made draft in this year's draft. Some of the names that we threw around were Matas Bazulis, Stefan Castle, maybe even like a Reed Shepherd could have been like a one of the guys that maybe threw us off. And we mentioned Ron Holland's name very briefly, but it wasn't a guy that we really knew a bunch of info on. So when we were in the live stream and the Pistons picked Ron Holland, we were kind of like, okay, well, this is what we do know. We know that he's with the G League Ignite. We know that he's a little bit more defensive minded, that he may be a little bit more offensively refined than an Asar Thompson. And we said, well, make sure to tune into episode number 37, and we're here. So we're going to be trying to give you guys an inside look on everything you need to know about Ron Holland and what he might add to the Detroit Pistons roster that is needed for this team to succeed. So some of the first info that you need to know, he's 6'8", 206 pounds, only 18 years old. Coming out of Duncanville High School just last year, Holland was a 5-star prospect and the #1 recruit in the country before deciding to sign with the G League Ignite. We talked about some of the teams that wanted him at the NCAA level was Duke and a lot of those blue blood teams. Ryan, when looking at some of the background of Ron Holland, what are some of your first thoughts and things that really stuck out to you that we have to mention about Ron?
Yeah, obviously coming out of high school, #2 ranked prospect, well, #1 ranked recruit at that time, then fell to #2, but still a top ranked prospect coming out of high school. Everybody thought he was going to be the #1 pick in this year's draft. Obviously that changed because of what happened with the Ignite. Nothing bad happened. It was just more so he kind of got his weaknesses exposed a little bit. He came in, he still scored at a high rate, played his game at a high rate. The only downside to what happened this past year was obviously he had that thumb injury, which he only played limited games because he didn't want to risk injuring that more. And then also he struggled taking on the number one responsibility of being the top guy within that team. Obviously, that team is loaded with young prospects. Multiple of them got selected in this year's draft, most notably Matas Bazulis. I forget his name, but there was one that went in the later first round, and then one that went in the second. So like they had a lot of talent this past year. Matas probably, I would say, if you didn't know that Ron Holland was ranked as high as he did as coming out of high school, rather, you would think, oh, Matas Bazulis is the best player on that team. You wouldn't even think of Ron Holland. If you knew Ron Holland coming out of high school, you're going, well, he's had a little shaky of a season there in terms of he got his weaknesses exposed a little bit. But outside of that, like coming out of high school, top ranked recruit. He has 2 gold medals under his belt for Team USA. Obviously not at the highest level with LeBron and everybody, but that would be the 20 under teams that he would have played with that he's getting these gold medals. He had a strong performance for NBA executives at the Nike Hoop Summit, which only select few people even get an invite to that, and he was one of them. So that shows you how good he is alone. He's just he's an overall well-rounded prospect, and he's 18 years old. I want to make note of that specifically because Asar Thompson, coming out of Overtime Elite when we got him, was 20 years old. That's a 2-year gap right there. And everybody's going like, oh, he's the same thing as Asar Thompson. He's the same age and whatnot. He was not the same age. That Asar's older, and that means like when you hit 20 or even a little bit older than 20, you start to slow down a little bit. Not obviously these guys are much faster than a 30-year-old in the NBA, but the point is like Asar Thompson, 20 years old versus Ron Holland, 18 years old. There's less room for growth for Asar Thompson versus Ron Holland because Ron Holland is just 18 years old, ready to go. And when you're younger, it's easier to develop new things than when you're older. So I want to make one big note of that is that Ron Holland is younger than Asar Thompson, and he's actually a little bit bigger. Asar Thompson 6'6", 218, and then Ron Holland 6'8", 206. He's a little bit bigger in the height department and length department. The size in terms of weight, Asar beats him there by a little bit. But Ron Holland is, I feel, as if more of a raw prospect than Asar Thompson was coming out of Overtime Elite.
Well, and something I want to mention is when you watched the Detroit Pistons last year and watched Asar Thompson try to bring the ball up the court, or when he would get it around the 3-point line and the defense pressured him while he was dribbling the basketball, he just seemed to struggle with that side of the, side of basketball a lot, where when you watch Ron Holland in his time with Ignite, he is very smooth with the basketball, and Asar Thompson, we know, is pretty solid at finishing at the basket, but Ron Holland just shows no fear when trying to make aggressive shots around the rim. And I think that's what impressed me most about this year's draft is a lot of these guys were just rim rushers. And I just love that about Ron Holland because it means a lot after seeing some of our past draft prospects struggle around the rim and creating fouls and stuff like that. We've seen guys like Killian Hayes and Sekou Doumbouya are great at rim rushing when no one's there and able to make, sometimes these weird acrobatic layups. But this Ron Holland will put his body into you and make these tough around the rim baskets. And that's very veteran. Like we see guys like that do that now, like a John Morant, a Donovan Mitchell, that are very good at putting their body into the defender as they're going up for the layup. Cade's just finally starting to figure out some of those little intricacies. Where Ron Holland, he's very far along in that aspect for being 18 years old, and it seems like the game's really slowed down for him at a younger age. Obviously now it's going to take a little bit for him to get used to the NBA, but hopefully he'll be able to kind of keep that raw, natural talent around the rim as he goes into his first season with the Detroit Pistons. His pro comparison for Ron Holland is RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett's another one of those young players that's really good at putting his body into defenders and making those tough layups. Creating isn't a strength of Holland's. Obviously, we know that offensively, it's going to take a little bit of a time, but he does show improvements with his ball handling and then separating him and the defender into step back jump shots or getting to spots while penetrating. Also, when I watched a lot of his film, he showed signs of a Richard Hamilton, a young Richard Hamilton. We know that Rip was great at finding space offensively and getting to the spots where the defenders didn't know you could go or didn't know he was going to go. They're very unpredictable as far as offensive movement. I saw that a lot in Ron Holland. I think that's going to be very good for this Detroit Pistons team, for a guy like Ron to find open spaces, try to make looks for the basket. And because we know that Cade Cunningham has a great passing ability, knows how to find people. Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser, a lot of these guys know how to find people. And then we just added a great passer in Tobias Harris at the small forward position. And that's one thing we didn't see from Ausar this last season, is when he was on the offensive end, he wasn't really moving. He always seemed stagnant, always seemed confused. I remember several times Isaiah Stewart and Jaden Ivey really getting into him and yelling at him. You could see physically through the screen that they were trying to get him to go certain places and move. And it seemed like he didn't know a lot of the plays, where a lot of what you see in the scouting report, and it's evident through film, is that Ron Holland's always locked in. He just seems to have that basketball eye. What are some of your next thoughts on Ron Holland and breaking him down?
Well, obviously, a weakness for him is his shooting. Offensively, not great. In regards to 3-point shooting, shooting 24% from the field, from three rather. And then I wanted to compare him a little bit with his stats to what Ausar Thompson did from coming out of Overtime Elite. Now, the difference between Overtime Elite and G League Ignite is, well, Overtime Elite is a lesser league than the G League. G League is a developmental league for the NBA teams, obviously, but in Ignite's case, it's more of a developmental prospect team, and that is closing at the season's end, which the season has ended. No more Ignite team. But what Ron Holland did this past year was he averaged 20.6 points, 6.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 2.5 steals, a block, shooting 45% from the field, 24% from three, and then 76% at the line. And then you compare that to Ausar Thompson with his Overtime Elite season. Averaged 17 points, 6.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, nearly 6 assists, 2.5 steals, a block, shooting 47% from the field, 33% from three, and 70% at the line. So there's a little bit of like, yes, Ausar Thompson shot the ball better from three at Overtime Elite than Ron Holland did with the Ignite. But Ron Holland proved that he can be more of a scorer than Ausar Thompson. I have no doubt in the abilities of Ron Holland. I think truly what it came down to is Ron Holland wasn't shooting a lot of threes this past year. That's the bottom line. I mean, you have Matas Bazulis who can shoot from deep, not relatively like, wow, but he can shoot a little bit from three. There's numerous players on that Ignite team that weren't afraid to take that shot. And one of those players that weren't afraid to take that shot was actually Ron Holland. Ron Holland has a lot of confidence as a player overall, and he's still not afraid to take that three, even if he knows, like, yeah, I'm not the greatest three-point shooter out there, but I'm still going to take that shot. And so when you look at the stats and you compare it a little bit, my biggest note on it is the fact that Overtime Elite is a lesser league than the G League is. So Ron Holland is in a pro-style system that these guys are, a lot of them have played at the NBA level. A lot of these coaches have coached at the NBA level and are helping these guys mold these young players into just make it an easier transition to the NBA. Whereas Overtime Elite, these guys, a lot of these coaches, some of them, most notably, who's no longer with them, but Kevin Ollie was the director of that program down there in Overtime Elite in Atlanta. And he coached at the NBA briefly. He's coaching in the NBA now, but historically good college coach. Obviously had that little situation there at UConn where he gets in trouble. But outside of that, like he helped create a program that helps develop these young players. But it's still a lesser league than G League it is. And so when you look at the stats and you compare it, even though it looks almost identical, which it pretty much is, the only thing that's different is the 3-point percentage and then scoring. That's about the only difference, really, in the two players coming out of their respective last seasons going into this upcoming NBA season. But again, it's a lesser league. Ron Holland was a top-ranked prospect. Asar Thompson was never a top-ranked prospect, not as high as Ron Holland. And Ron Holland is a little bit more raw. Obviously, he's shown that he can't be the number one option within an offense, but that's okay because we have Cade Cunningham, we have Jaden Ivey, we have Jalen Duren. Ron Holland can be himself with this Pistons team, and this is something that he hasn't been able to do potentially since high school. And so when you have what he can do offensively, which he's a great slasher, can finish around the rim with ease. His ball handling is pretty solid. He can shake defenders. And then you go defensively, like he's a great defensive-minded player. He can his length alone, he can pickpocket you. He's looking for that steal. He looks to defend around the rim. Like he's just a great overall defensive prospect. But then his offensive game, it is lacking compared to like a Jaden Ivey, to a Cade Cunningham, even to Jalen Duren. But he makes up for it with his confidence and his athleticism. And if he can be himself within this team this next season, like I'm very excited for this prospect just because of that alone. But he's a well-rounded player, and obviously G League Ignite, higher level than Overtime Elite, and I would say better, more refined player than Asar Thompson.
Make sure to comment below your thoughts on Ron Holland and some of your first thoughts, comments, questions, and make sure to comment that below on his play style and how that will work with the Detroit Pistons. So we kind of talked about what he can offer to the Detroit Pistons, the finishing ability, the defense, the passing ability. But now let's talk about what the front office has to say. And just 2 weeks ago, Tom Gores sat with Trajan Langdon in his introductory press conference with the Pistons media, and he didn't have much to say when asked about what type of prospects the Detroit Pistons need to add to their roster through the draft. And so I was kind of interested in seeing what his press conference would be like after drafting a player. And here are some of the comments he made on Ron Holland and his thoughts on his character, his play style, and his athletic ability. This is from Sports Illustrated. It starts by saying, following the draft, Langdon opened up on selecting Holland with the 5th overall pick. With his skill set, he believes the 6'8" wing has some of the most upside of any player in the 2024 draft class. Quote, high character human being, works his butt off. He has the leadership piece. He has the high compete level piece. He has the high winner piece to him, Langdon said of Holland. He's got one of the biggest upsides of anyone in the draft. It goes on to say, Langdon has touched on an interaction he had with Holland back at the draft combine in Chicago. Holland compared himself to the likes of Mikal Bridges, Jaden McDaniels, which Langdon liked to hear. Quote of a Langdon saying at the press conference says, his end-to-end speed, his size for the position, his competition level, big time rebounder at his position. We all think he will be able to guard 1 through 4 positions, which he wants to do. Langdon continues to say he was asked to do more with the Ignite. That's one thing he did say. When we interviewed him in Chicago, he said, I understand what my role is. I understand who I am as a player. The quote continues to say, the people he compared himself to, it goes on to say, Jaden McDaniels, Jaylen Brown, Mikal Bridges, they came in as defensive players first. He knows who he is, which is huge at 18, 19 years old. That's end quote. And then it goes on to say, with the addition on Holland, Detroit adds another versatile two-way wing to their young core. Despite his lack of shooting, the Pistons continue to build a core built to thrive in the modern NBA. So Langdon obviously speaking very highly of Ron Holland. And that's good to see. You always want to see a front office that's excited for a young prospect. And I think as Pistons fans, we can respect Ron Holland looking up to players like a Jaden McDaniels, Jaylen Brown, Mikal Bridges. I think those are great players to look up to who are very high energy, well-rounded basketball players in today's NBA and playing heavy roles and also playing on winning teams in today's NBA. And I also think to the point of the Detroit Pistons picking up Tobias Harris in free agency, I think they did that because the Pistons knew they needed an offensive-minded player who could still play rock-solid defense with drafting a guy like Ron Holland. I think Tobias is a reinforcement for Holland so that Holland doesn't even necessarily have to worry about the offensive end. Let the offense come to him. Let Tobias go out, find his shot where he knows he can make his jumpers and make his 3 pointers. And I think that kind of alleviates some pressure from Ron Holland that Asar Thompson had last season. Asar Thompson came into a team that he knew they needed everything and really needed a player that could take on a responsibility of the offensive end while also playing the same defense he knows a team expects of him. So I'm hoping with bringing in a guy like Tobias Harris makes Ron Holland feel a little bit more comfortable within this Detroit Pistons team and accepting his role and being able to just kind of work on his offensive game. It was really nice to see Trajan kind of give some insight and some card hold facts of what he liked about Holland and what he thinks of a role player he can add to this Pistons organization.
Yeah, not only that, but when you go back to the introductory press conference for Ron Holland there, you had some of the media pretty much questioning Langdon's selection of Ron Holland right there on the spot. And my favorite quote, and I think I'm going to keep saying it forever, is that Langdon said that I am very comfortable with the guy to my left in Ron Holland. I am very comfortable with the player. I'm very comfortable with the person. I'm very comfortable with the individual. And when I heard Trajan Langdon say that, I'm sitting there going like, yep, he knows what he's doing. He has a plan. He knows what kind of players he wants to bring in. He knows what type of coaching staff he wants to lead this organization with. He knows the X's and O's. He knows the day-to-day. He's really put himself in a position where he knows everyone and everything and what he wants this organization to look like in the future. And I know that's just one comment, but like usually a lot of GMs or president of basketball operations in that situation would kind of beat around the bush and give like a kind of nonchalant response to that. Whereas Trajan Langdon's like, you know what? I'm going to just go out and say, I am very comfortable with my selection of Ron Holland. There's not a lot of guys that will go out there and say that. So the class and character of Trajan Langdon alone in that situation, I was very happy with. And when you think of the addition of Tobias Harris now, Tobias is obviously, we know him. He's a great scorer, great rebounder, has a high basketball IQ. And that's something that we saw him do as a Piston earlier on in his career. And hopefully he can continue to do that with us now. But what the addition of him shows me is obviously Tobias is probably going to be starting at the 4. Let's be realistic here. There's no way Stu beats Tobias out for that role. I mean, I guess I could be wrong, but I would take Tobias over Stu any day. But that's neither here nor there. What that tells me of bringing in the addition of Tobias is I think that Langdon and maybe now Bickerstaff, they're wanting Holland to be more of a 3 than being a 4 or playing at the 2, being a wing, a true wing. And that excites me a little bit more because there's a lot of the guys in the NBA today who, well, this is positionless basketball. Anybody out there can pretty much play the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5. There's not one guy that's his role within an offense. Multiple players have multiple different roles now. That's what Asar Thompson struggled with is what role do I take on? Do I take on the guy that clearly we need help at the wing spot, but also like the four when Stu's out, what do I do then? Do I fill in for him? And then Monty Williams just did a bad job of communicating the certain tasks and certain jobs and putting these guys in certain situations to win. We just talked about it in the previous episode. He had a tough, well, I wouldn't say a tough time. He had an intentional situation where he was throwing in guys into the game where they shouldn't have been there. He was poor game managing. And with that being said, like what the difference between last year and this year is, this year adding a more refined player into Tobias Harris, a great vet in the NBA, adding in you just added in Wendell Moore in that trade to move up in the second round. I don't know if he sticks with the roster. I hope he does because I think he's a good prospect still relatively young. But you're seeing all these shifts into players getting brought in. And Tobias, to me, was the biggest one because it showed you the role that Langdon is wanting to put down and see with Ron Holland is a true-blooded wing. And there's not a lot of guys in the NBA today that have a true role within an organization. And the fact that he's kind of allowing Holland to grow into his role with an addition of Tobias, or like even just a vet player that's been around the league for a while and has that experience to use and mentor Ron Holland. I think there's a lot of ties within that addition, and I'm excited to see what Ron Holland can do with just his role going forward.
Well, and obviously with a player like Ron Holland, you know, in knowing what like an Asar Thompson has done and very similar play styles, so on. It's hard. There's a lot in question, but I on the side of my screen, I have Ron Holland's highlights playing while we're talking about him. And there is no question he's going to be a very exciting player for the Detroit Pistons. Half of his highlights are just these hammer dunks, like just exhilarating, so fast up and down the court, beating everybody down and just throwing down amazing dunks. So either way, if you're a Detroit Pistons fan and you're a fan of basketball, you're going to like Ron Holland because he's going to give you everything you want. Good defense, fast style basketball, and then just power dunks. So much fun to watch. And then also some of the highlights too that I've been noticing is I talked about his finishing ability, but I think that's going to be something that stands out and that kind of puts him above like an Asar Thompson in the minutes or whatever it might be, because Asar Thompson really on all three levels really just struggled on offensively. I'm hoping that he's having a big offseason to kind of prove us all wrong and has a great season. I really want him to. But Ron Holland, especially, and you were talking about the differences between like the G League Ignite and Overtime Elite. With the G League Ignite, there is a big height difference because they are semi-professional players just below the NBA. And so Asar Thompson was finishing on guys that were high school to mid-college age, where Ron Holland at 17 and a half years old was playing against grown men who had either experience in the NBA or experience at the G League for a good couple of years since 2020. And a lot of these guys are over 7 feet tall. And so I think that proves even more how impressive Ron Holland was at the G League Ignite level, dunking on 7-footers and making these crazy and one plays amongst 7 feet tall people, where Asar Thompson was doing that, but it was against high schoolers to mid college players. I just think it's impressive what Ron Holland was able to do at such a young age.
Yeah, when you think of him and finishing around the rim, and like you mentioned, these guys aren't small. They're massive individuals, right below the NBA, just because a lot of them are playing, hoping to make that final roster spot on an NBA team, or wanting to work their way up to having their two-way deal be a long-term deal. A lot of these guys are uber talented players. Obviously, they're not the NBA now. To make the roster is much harder than I wouldn't say much harder than it used to be. It's much easier now than then, but it's still very hard to do. And what Ron Holland, the way he finishes around the rim, the way he is his high basketball IQ allows him to look for passes, looks to rebound, and like he's 6'8". He's not obviously he's uber athletic, but still the fact that he's on the shorter end and is able to out rebound 7-footers around him around the rim, like that's impressive. He just has a knack for it. He has his length, he has quickness, he has a lot of intensity with his game. And obviously we saw that with Asar Thompson a little bit at Overtime Elite. But again, that like you mentioned, they're high schoolers to college age people, and they're not like if they were truly spectacular, I believe wholeheartedly they'd be playing at like schools like Duke, at Kentucky and whatnot, or even would have made that jump to the NBA much sooner and take the conventional approach, or even went to the G League, go to G League Ignite, play with that team. It's a lesser competition than the G League is. Now, obviously, we've seen Alex Sarr, #2 overall pick in this year's draft, the Wizards, played at Overtime Elite for a little bit. He did do that, but like he obviously knew like if I really truly want to redefine my game and just add some new skills, develop my shot a little bit more, I need to go play overseas. I need to go back home, play in Australia, which is not home for him, but play in Australia, play in the NBL, play in a league that these are grown men. This is going to help challenge me, develop my game more than what Asar Thompson and Overtime Elite is just it's a great developmental league for high school players. It's not a great developmental league for pro players. And obviously we've seen a couple picks here and there for like Asar Thompson, Amon Thompson, the Thompson twins, and then a couple players this year. But the point is, it's a lesser league than the G League is. And the fact you have Ron Holland, who can finish with these around these 7-footers, around grown men, who can dismantle a defense with his basketball IQ and his passing. His quickness beats guys off the dribble. He's not afraid to box them out. He's not afraid to just body on a 7-footer and play defense on him. He's not afraid of these little things. He has a lot of intensity, has a lot of confidence. And again, the Overtime Elite is a lesser league than the G League is. And what Ron Holland did this past year was more impressive in my eyes than what Asar Thompson did at Overtime Elite.
And I highly recommend, if you haven't yet, everybody go check out his highlight reel. Seriously, I was 3 minutes in and there was like 14 dunks and they were all awesome. So make sure to go check it out. He's going to be a very fun player to watch. And then also make sure to comment below your thoughts, questions, concerns about Ron Holland. We'd love to know what you guys have to say after we've talked about what the front office has to say about him. One other thing, just about a year and a half ago, him and Matas were highly touted to possibly be the first overall pick. Just 2 months ago, you know, he was in talks of being the first overall pick, but he had a thumb and season-ending injury, so that kind of messed with his stock a little bit, just because he wasn't able to get that much more film on himself. And that will do it for episode number 37 of season 2. Make sure to like and subscribe and be on the ride for this crazy Detroit Pistons offseason content. A lot's happened, so make sure to tune into all the past episodes. Check out our YouTube profile. We've talked about everything that's going on, so make sure to tune in and be and get in the know with all the little details and intricacies to every little thing, that all the drama that's going on with the Pistons. We will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.